In this presentation, I'm going to talk about learning resources for Hawaii Redistricting Online. Hawaii Redistricting Online is a powerful application with data and tools to support redistricting in Hawaii. These data and tools are being used by the Hawaii Reapportionment Commission for their redistricting, and the same data, the same tools are available for members of advisory councils and members of the public who wish to draw their own redistricting plans. So before we jump into these learning resources, just a bit of background on the use of computers in redistricting. Back in the 60s was when computers first started being used, IBM mainframe systems. Through the 70s, there was some use. In the 1980s, the Rose Institute, that's the photo here, they were one of the early pioneers in using computers for redistricting. By 1990, computers were being used a lot. Here in Hawaii, I was not involved with the project, but I've seen the notes. It was done on mainframe computers in the basement of Kalani Moku. Average cost of those computers, $500,000. By the year 2000, so 20 years ago, there were a number of commercial tools, Maptitude, Autobound, and in fact, Autobound is the one. I was supporting the commission at that time, and we did use Autobound, which was a desktop tool, pretty much a GIS mapping tool, not that user-friendly, but it did have the tools for redistricting, which were very powerful. And the commission, knowing that the public could get copies of Autobound if they wanted, did share its data. So the commission's data in 2000 was shared with the public who could go get Autobound and learn Autobound. It didn't happen. The data was shared, but no plans were submitted at that time. I think the software was just still a little too hard to use 20 years ago. Now let's go back. Well, the commission was using that. So here's going back 20 years in the Star Bulletin, a quote from the project manager at that time, David Rosenbrock, our current project manager, also talking about, because the commission did have this powerful technology, that it had the opportunity to make a decision, reconsider that decision based on public testimony, and go back and make changes. Because it does, even without the mapping, submitting of plans online, the public still had opportunity to comment on maps, mostly paper maps that were provided at meetings. But the commission then could go back and did go back and change their plans after they put out for public consideration. So the software did help the commission, but it wasn't so helpful for the public 20 years ago. 10 years ago, it was a different story. Then the first version of Hawaii Redistricting Online was available, was used by the commission, and that same data and tools were made available to the public and the advisory councils to use. And indeed, it was used. Plans were created by the public, submitted, and were shared with the commission, and some lines were changed based on that public submission of plans, and of course, the public testimony at the public hearings. And now today, we do have the current version of Hawaii Redistricting Online. The same company, Esri, has created this. The tools look quite similar. The data, of course, is updated. And there are some new tools in there, and we'll talk about these tools as we go through the learning resources. But these are then the same data and tools that are currently being used by the technical group working on plans. And it is available, and that's what we're going to talk about now for advisory councils and the public. So this is what the opening page of Hawaii Redistricting Online looks like. The URL is down there in the corner. It is available from the Reapportionment Commission page. But before we jump into that, let's just do a quick review of what's happened up until now, looking at redistricting and reapportionment in Hawaii. The first step was reapportionment, which required census data. We did receive that census data on August 12th, process that to create two population bases, the federal population base used for the congressional redistricting, and the Hawaii permanent resident population base used for apportionment and redistricting for the Hawaii State Senate and State House. Again, those were described in more detail at the August 26th commission meeting. If you want more information, you can go back to the video. The link is online and it's here on the slide. The other thing that has been talked about at the commission meetings, the July 20th meeting, was the various redistricting guidelines. Total deviation, this means the overall plan deviation, the overall range between districts for the ideal population. Ideally, they're all the same. The reality is you can't always do that. For federal plans, they still need to be less than 1% difference between the highest and lowest. For state Senate and state House, 10% between the highest and the lowest deviation from the ideal. We talked about these again more on the July 20th if you want more information on that. But other important ones are the notion of compactness, that districts should be geometrically compact. There's three little slides here. You can see the first one is, the second one not so much. The third one, they should be geographically compact. And this is an important one that's often overlooked. Here in Hawaii in particular, the ridges are very prominent geographic features that in many places are impassable. You can't cross the ridge. So just like you can't cross the ridge, district boundaries by and large should not cross over ridges. That would, as a measure of geographical compactness. Likewise, there's other guidelines. They should be contiguous. In other words, all parts of a district should be connected to each other, no disconnects, no one-point connections, and wherever possible, preserve socioeconomic communities. Don't split communities into no submergence. The qualifier on all these is where practicable, given our geography, given the shape of census blocks. Sometimes you can't do these as well as you'd like, but these are the guidelines that will be adhered to by the commission. And if anyone else submits a plan for the commission's consideration, they should follow those same guidelines. Again, more details, you can go to the July 20th video from the commission where we presented this in detail. So the learning resources for Hawaii Redistricting Online are available on the reapportionment website. Before we jump into those, just quickly, if you don't want to change a plan, if all you want to do is look at the plan, you can see any plan that's been presented by the technical group. And then later, as plans are proposed for public consideration from the commission as a whole, those will be available as interactive maps and as PDFs that you don't need a login. So right now there's two up there, the two congressional plans that have been presented by the technical group to the commission. You can go look at those without a login. But this presentation is geared for people interested in actually coming up with their own plans. And that's where Hawaii Redistricting Online has the tools for that, but it does require a login. So we will talk about that. When you click the Hawaii Redistricting Online, it opens up to a number of different resources for you. So the first one is the link to the application itself. The URL is down in the corner of all these slides, but you don't need to remember it or write it down. Just go to the reapportionment page and you'll be able to just click this link to start the online application. There's also a video tutorial. This is a 25-minute video that steps through the process of creating a redistricting plan using Hawaii Redistricting Online. At the time the video was made, we only had the congressional data, and so that's the data that's shown in that plan. Since then, we have gotten the data for the state Senate, state House. They have been apportioned, so they are ready for redistricting. There is an addendum to the tutorial that talks in more detail about these plans. The current edition, and what we're going to talk about in these learning resources is what I call a click list. So in the video tutorial, I showed the various steps as you go through redistricting and how to do them. You could see me do it, but you might later be wondering, oh, I remember I saw in the video how he used these redistricting tools, but how did he click? What did he actually do to do that? So that's why I've created these click lists. They show the specific mouse clicks that I used in the video, plus some additional ones that have been added later, some additional information. So these click lists are the learning resources that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. And they basically do cover the steps that you go through in creating your own plan. So you can see those steps up here. The click lists follow those same steps. So when you first open up the application, you'll be dealing with the File tab, talking about template plans. When you first open it, you'll be asked to choose a template plan. After that, you can start working with your own plans, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. The next step in creating a plan is viewing the maps, the district deviations, and then actually assigning districts. This is where you spend most of your time. And today, talking about learning resources, I'll spend most of our time talking specifically a bit about the View tab, but mostly about the Create tab, which is where you change district assignments to create a new plan. There is then the review step where you look at your plan, check it against the guidelines. We'll talk about that. If you want, you can share your plan, or you might be invited by someone else who wants to share their plan. You can do that with groups. We'll talk about that. And finally, if you have a plan that you like and you'd like to submit it for the commission's consideration, there is a submit tab to submit your plan, and we'll talk about that. So going through each one, let's start with click list number one. There's a snippet over there on the right. You can see it's for a new user. And in the click list itself, there's much more detail, but it goes over the step-by-step what to do to create a new user account. You'll create a username, a password, create a question. There's a lot of different steps. They're all summarized in click list one. So if you're at that stage, you're not sure what to do, open up click list one. It's a PDF, and it'll have those steps for you that you can follow. If you're a returning user, it's pretty simple. You'll use that username and password that you created, and you'll be able to log in to the online application. When you do log in, you'll always be presented with a template plan. We'll talk in a minute how you can then start changing that into your own plan, but you always start by selecting a template plan. There are templates for the 2 congressional districts, and now we do have the templates for the Hawaii State House and State Senate for each basic island unit. And as I talk about in the video, there's 2 versions of these templates: a blank template where no census blocks are assigned, and a current one that's starting from the 2020 boundaries. And that's where we find the commission itself and most people who are working with plans find it best to start with the current districts and then start making adjustments to those current districts. But both are available as templates, and you can choose whichever ones you wish to work with. Also, you can see down at the bottom, there are a couple of templates now for the plans that have been presented to the commission by the technical group. So they have a TG in front for technical group. Later, as the commission itself proposes plans for public consideration, those will also show up here as proposed, and they'll be available for you to look at, and if you want, suggest changes. So you open a template plan that you might want to work with. The first thing to do is to save it as your own plan. And so that's where there's a Save As button on the File tab. You give it a name. You can put a description. That's up to you what you want to put. And then that becomes your plan that you can start making changes using the tools we'll talk about in a moment. But when you come back and open the app later, again, you'll be asked to choose a template. But as soon as you've chosen that template, it'll open up and you can use the File tab to open your own plan, save the plan. You can see the tools that are here. Again, more details are in the actual click list for PDF that you can download and read. Click list 5, now we're moving on to the view and create step, the major step in creating a redistricting plan. So There's a lot that I showed in the video. There's a lot in the click list itself. I want to highlight a few things that I think are quite important. And that is this first one. There are two different ways to view your district, either as filled in districts where they're filled in with color, or as outline districts. So there is a setting there, display lines or fill districts. I'm going to show you a couple more examples just to make this more clear. So here's an example on the left. If you've checked fill districts, you'll see your districts are filled with color. And that's often the easiest way to see the difference between the districts. But sometimes you really want to see that map underneath. You want to see the street names, the park names, the community names. And there it's handy to just display the district boundaries as lines. Then you'll click display lines. And it's easy to go back and forth. But I pointed out because some people do find it very handy to be able to turn off the color and just see that as lines. I should mention the click list also. You can change the colors, and in the click list, I describe how to do that. But here, this is the one I thought was important to show. And particularly, you can change the base map. Again, we talk about that in the click list. But underneath, by default, it's the street base map. But you can also choose an imagery base map. And when you're looking at the imagery, here again, it's very useful to turn on display lines and not see it filled in with color. It really helps see the imagery better. So that's a bit on the view tab. Now we jump into the real heart of redistricting, and that is this create tab. So there's a series of tools for moving around the window. I've shown a couple of them here. There's more in the click list. The pan tool is the main one I use. Occasionally I use the zoom in tool, but with the pan tool, I can click and drag my map. So I do use that one quite a bit. But really what I mostly want to do is assign census blocks to districts. So that's what we're going to look at now, is the tools to do that. And I want to point out something important that I maybe didn't emphasize enough in the video, but I do want to emphasize it here. And that is this selection level. So you can see I've shown two maps here. The upper one zoomed out to the entire island of Oahu, and it says selection level tracked. Yeah, that means if I was to use some of the tools I'll show you in a minute to select, I wouldn't be selecting census blocks. I'd be selecting tracts, which are very large, and it can get very confusing. So when I'm using the districting tools, I'll show you in a moment, I don't use them at tract. If you zoom in, you'll get down to the block group level. Even that I find can be quite confusing because, again, block groups are larger than blocks. What we want to do is zoom in. This is what I have found most useful. Zoom in to where the selection level is block. That means when you use a tool and you select something on the map, it will be selecting a census block. And you can see them here on the map itself. The black outlines, each of those is a census block, and the number inside shows the population within that census block. So there are times you want to kind of zoom out and see the pattern, but don't do redistricting tools at that level. Make sure you're zoomed in to the selection level block. So with that, you can jump over to the tools. The simplest tool is the pick tool, which just means I want to pick one census block and I want to change it. So in this case, I'm going to want to change it to 47. So I chose the district as house 47. That means when I click on my map, whichever census block I click on will get assigned to house district 47. So there's more details on that in both the video and the click list. But I do use that tool more frequently, though. I find the rectangle tool handy to use because I can select more than one at a time. I can click and drag a rectangle and select multiple census blocks. Again, I make sure my selection level is block, and then I'll select multiple census blocks to assign them to the district. In this case, it would be 47. As I'm changing those assignments, I'm watching the district window down below and checking my district population and how much it deviates from the ideal or the target. I can see in this case, 47 is 4.78% below. So I might want to continue doing some work here to try to get that even better. So I'm always watching that, and I'm always going kind of back and forth, right? So I'm using the pan tool to move my map around, and then I'm using usually the rectangle tool to assign districts. I assign some districts. I want to move my map a little bit. I go over and click the pan tool. It gets the little orange outline around it, which shows it's active. I move my map. Then I go back and choose the rectangle tool, change some more blocks, and I go back and forth between these. But I'll tell you what happens to me sometimes still, and it'll probably happen to you. You'll think you've grabbed the pan tool, but in fact, you have the rectangle tool still there. And when you go click on your map and think you're going to move the map, instead you assign a bunch more census blocks. And it's like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. In which case you'll be very happy to learn about this tool, the undo button. This is the other one I use a lot. I've changed a set of blocks and it's like, whoa, my deviations just got real bad. I'll click the undo button and it'll undo that change. If I click it again, it'll undo the previous change all the way back until the last time I saved. And I do find it useful to save my plan every so often while I'm working. And so that's the undo and the various tools. There is another tool that I want to share with you. And this one we've updated. So in the map contents, there's a little circle with a triangle inside up in the upper corner by the plus and minus zoom in, zoom out buttons. If you click that button, it opens up the map contents. And what that is, there's a number of additional reference layers, and these have recently been updated that you might find handy as you're coming up with your plan. So you've started to assign some blocks. Your district boundaries are different than the existing ones. You'd like to see the existing ones. In this case, we're in State House. We could go click the little empty box and it'll turn green check mark, and we'll see the State House 2020 lines on our map. You may want to refer to Ahupua'a. Again, you can check that box. You'll see Ahupua'a lines. Elementary school layers are sometimes useful to refer to. And if you're on Oahu, you will see the Oahu neighborhood boards. You can turn these on and off by opening this map contents window. Once you've turned them on or off, you can click that arrow to the left and it will close it back so you can see the full map. So that is the map contents. As I mentioned, it has recently been updated to add those additional layers that people sometimes find useful as reference layers. So now you've been working, you've got a new plan, you want to review to make sure it meets all the guidelines. You're going to move to the review tab. And for your plan, you want to check the integrity. The application itself will check a number of different things. One of the key ones is the deviation check. In fact, the overall range check is the key one. That's where I had mentioned earlier, 1% for congressional plans, 10% for state Senate and state House plans. This is the overall range between your highest deviation and your lowest deviation. So when you're working on some of the basic island units, like on Kauai, there's 3. It's not that hard to see in the district window, the highest and lowest. But you're working on Oahu, there's 35. It's not easy to see in the district window. But if you can go run the integrity test, it'll quickly check your overall range. And if it's beyond 10%, as was the case here, you'll see a red X and you'll want to go click the details button. Again, I talk more in detail about this. I give more information in the click list itself on how to use that details button. But this is a very key check. The other ones that are important are the null assignment check and connectivity checks. Every census block must be assigned, and the application will check for that. If there's a red X, then click the zoom to. And connectivity also is the important one, that all census blocks in your district are connected. If that one has a red X, click the details button. And as I mentioned before, within the click list itself is more information about how to handle those when you see errors like that in your plan. So you've gone in, you fix things, or maybe you want some help, you want to share your plan with others, or maybe you've invited to join a group and share, someone else wants to share their plan with you. There is a share tab where you can accept invitations to join other groups or create your own group and invite people to share. Each of these groups is private. Only you and the other members of the group can see the plans that you're working on. So again, this is totally optional. If you just want to develop your own plan, you can. But if you do want to share it with a group, you would use the share tab to do that. Finally, you've got everything ready to go. Your integrity checks have checked. You passed the redistricting guidelines. You have a plan you'd like the commission to consider. Then you move on to the submit tab, which has just one button, submit plan. It'll ask you to describe your plan and do a number of things that are described in more detail in the click list itself. But that is the final step then in creating a plan and sharing it with the commission. So we've gone over a number of learning resources to use Hawaii Redistricting Online. I should add one more. I've summarized these because these are the ones that I've found most useful in the work I've done with redistricting and supporting the commission. But there are a lot of other tools in Hawaii Redistricting Online. And that's the one tab I didn't talk about. That's the Learn tab. Here on the Learn tab, you can find the same information. I put the click lists up there, the video, the introductory video. But there's also, if you want to learn more about all the other tools that are in the app, Esri does have, Esri is a company that has created this application. They do have detailed online help that you can get to from the Learn tab. But for our purposes here, as I mentioned, these are the most common tools that I find most useful that I've created the video tutorial for and the set of click lists for that I think will be the useful learning resources to help you use Hawaii Redistricting Online and create your own redistricting plan. Aloha.